Hi everyone, my name is Kirsty Anderson and I'm the Principal Manager of Public Engagement for the Global CCS Institute, and I'm going to be your host for this morning's webinar. So I said this morning because right now I'm rubbing the sleep from my eyes in Paris, but I'm thrilled to let you know that we're joined by an international audience today. So a very big thank you to those of you who are giving up your Wednesday evening in the Asia Pacific regions, and to those die-hard public engagement enthusiasts in the US and Canada who I'm sure must be tuning in your pajamas right now. This webinar is going to be recorded and it will be made available on our website in the near future, so you can listen again or pass it on to your friends and colleagues. So hopefully you can all see the title slides on our screen. But today we're going to be discussing processes of social site characterization and stakeholder engagement. And this discussion is based around the findings of a case study report on the ULCOS Blast Furnace Project, which is located in the east of France. This is a report that we've recently published on the Institute website, and the links to the report are going to be on the last slide of the presentation. Now today I've got the co-authors of this report, Laurent Jammes, who is here with me in Paris, and Philippe Verrier, who is dialing in from Toulouse. And they're going to talk more about the findings of their work and answer some of your questions. So I just wanted to briefly introduce Laurent and Philippe. Laurent is the Chief Operating Officer of Axis B. That's a company that provides expert consulting on subsurface engineering projects and related public acceptance issues. He's a member of several evaluation committees for research programs on CO2 capture and storage and decarbonised energy systems across the European Union. Previously, Laurent worked for 23 years with Greenberg, where his last position was Marketing and Technique Director for Carbon Services, which is the business unit in charge of developing CCS technology and business. And prior to working for Carbon Services, he held a variety of technical and managerial positions in R&D in France and also in China. Laurent has given many short courses and lectures on CCS to utilities, oil and gas companies and government agencies, and he is teaching at the Nancy School of Geology and at the Earth Physics Institute of Paris. He has a PhD in physics, an engineering diploma from École Centrale de Paris, and a master's in psychology. And Laurent is also a member of the Society for Petroleum Engineering. So very well qualified. Moving on to Philippe, he is the CEO of Acceptability, a company which develops e-technology to support the social acceptance of projects that have proven or potential environmental and societal impacts. Philippe has been a senior researcher at the French National Research Centre for 30 years, and he is Executive Officer of a cluster of 44 laboratories. Philippe's research was in modelling complex systems. He led a team of 30 scientists in biology, hydrology, ecotoxicology and ecology. He initiated and led several multidisciplinary international and European research programs combining social and natural sciences. He has developed methods and hybrid networks for science policy stakeholders interfacing, and that's to enhance the integration of research results and expertise in the decision-making process. And this has led, for example, to the Concert All methodology, a technology platform that's to support environment planning with the participation of stakeholders and integration of expertise for integrated water resources management. So you can tell from these CVs why I'm excited to have both Laurent and Philippe on air to share their experience with us. Okay, so for those of you who have made the effort to tune in today, just a little bit of housekeeping. We do welcome questions throughout the presentation, and these will be moderated by my colleague Kylie in Australia and sent through to me. Now your submitted questions, you just submit them through the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel that is on your screen. And please feel free to send them throughout the presentation. We will be saving them up for a question and answer session at the end. We'll do our best to get through as many of the questions as possible, but if there are some that we can't answer on air, we will do our best to address these offline. So now, without any further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Laurent to kick off this morning's discussion. Thanks, Laurent.
Many thanks, Christy, for your very nice introduction. So what we aim at discussing today with Philippe is the important issue of social acceptability for CCS projects. But what will be presented, although applied to the implementation of a very specific technology, has a much broader scope. Indeed, companies and more generally many decision makers today have to face more and more acceptability issues when developing large industrial or infrastructure projects because of their actual or perceived impact on the environment and the populations. So after defining what social acceptability means, the outline of the talk will follow a two-phase methodology targeted at creating conditions for project implementation which are agreed by all. So the first phase, social site characterization, aims at analyzing the project context and its stakeholders and identifying the most important project issues that should be addressed. The second phase, the stakeholder engagement phase, consists in creating the conditions for project implementation during focus group discussions where project options and their respective performance are discussed. So, but before moving further, I mean, let's ask ourselves what is social acceptability. The concept of social acceptability sounds quite familiar to us, but surprisingly, very few definitions exist in the literature. I would like to propose here two complementary approaches. The first one takes an ecological perspective, allowing introducing three concepts that set the stage. Social acceptability is the result of a process during which stakeholders and project developer work together to decide on conditions that are required to seamlessly integrate a project at a given time in its natural and human environment. So the key words here are process, stakeholder, and integrated or integration. The second one helps clarifying the nature of this process, at least from the stakeholder side. The conditions previously mentioned result from a judgmental process by which individuals impacted by or in capacity to impact a project first compare the perceived conditions in which a project is to be implemented with the current situation and alternatives, decide whether these conditions are acceptable or not, and if existing conditions are judged not to be sufficient, individual will initiate behavior sometime within a constituency group to shift these conditions toward a more favorable alternative. So as we will see in the following, the methodology that we propose is backed up by these two definitions.
Thanks, Laurent. I think this is a really helpful clarification, and I think it's just worth highlighting at this point that the work that you and Philippe will discuss today is really about understanding the processes that public engagement and outreach staff must go through to properly prepare for and understand how best to interact with their key stakeholders to get them on that path of making the judgments that you have discussed, and providing them with the support and information and the contact with trusted professionals to enable them to make the best decisions. Is that correct?
That's very correct.
Okay, so now that I know that you analysed a lot of experiences of other CCS demonstrations before undertaking this work. So I just wondered if you could talk a little about your conclusions from that analysis.
For sure. Social acceptance of CCS projects has been a priority topic in the agenda of project developers. All projects did put in place comprehensive programs to communicate with stakeholders and address their concerns. Most of them also completed an initial project context assessment phase. However, we all know that public opposition to projects has been quite strong. A few have not been possible for that only reason. Significant feedback is available from social acceptability studies and even stakeholder engagement sessions, which helps in the identification of best practices. For instance, although early engagement is preferable, it does not ensure acceptance of project. Trying to force a project with no flexibility in the agenda can just reinforce opposition. Educating the public does not suffice. Stakeholder interest must be accounted for, and local opposition can and has stopped projects. Best practices have been identified. For instance, adapt the communication to stakeholders, adopt a transparent and open-minded attitude, obtain support from authorities both at the local and central levels, and also involve trusted sources of information, such as scientists and NGOs that are supportive, of course. So now I would like to come back to the notion of process that I pointed out in the definitions of social acceptability and discuss about tasks and workflows. Standard practices essentially consist in completing environmental and social impact assessment that will nourish a project risk management plan, which includes risk mitigation actions. During these activities, contacts with stakeholders, if any, are usually limited to information gathering. Therefore, the societal action plan that is derived will only very partially address stakeholders' concern and fit their needs. A comprehensive characterization of the project issues and stakeholders' concerns require conducting a social site characterization study. This concept has been introduced by Sarah Wade and Sally Greenberg in a former GCCSI report. The content of the different methodological steps that such an analysis should follow will be presented later. However, even if they provide essential pieces of information, the analysis of project context, of stakeholders, and the identification of the most important project issues are not enough. A societal action plan based on these informations only could be objectively sound, but still not fully supported by stakeholders. What is required is to go a step further and actively engage stakeholders through dialogue in the co-construction of this societal action plan. We believe that these are the conditions for social acceptance. I will now discuss in more detail the three main steps to be followed to complete a comprehensive social site characterization. These three steps are the understanding of the project environment through an analysis of the context, the identification of the stakeholders and their mapping, and then conducting a materiality analysis of project-related issues. Materiality is a word that may sound a little far-fetched and requires some explanation. Material issues are simply issues that are significant to the stakeholders, to the project developers, or to both. The first step essentially consists in characterizing different aspects of the project environment, called factors, which could affect the implementation of the project. This type of analysis can be structured using a well-known methodology called PESTEL analysis, which is often used in strategic management. The PESTEL word is formed with the initials of the different aspects of the context that should be analyzed: the political, economic, social and cultural, technological, environmental, and legal factors. So most of these factors have proven to be quite pertinent for CCS projects in the context of social acceptability studies. For instance, the local economic conditions of the industrial history of the industrial history of a region may be favorable conditions in the implementation of a project.
Thanks, Laurent. I find the PESTEL acronym pretty handy, and also the detailed level of research that you provided in the case study for the ULCOS project was really helpful in terms of explaining just how comprehensive a good social site characterization should be. I think it's one of those areas that a number of people struggle with, the level of detail. So now the area that I often get asked questions on is about stakeholder identification or mapping. And I was just wondering if you could explain a little about that.
Sure. So the next step focuses on the characterization of the human aspects of the project context. I mean the identification and the mapping of all these project stakeholders. At this stage, it may be worthwhile clarifying the concept of stakeholders itself, which has its origins in the works of Freeman, who developed the stakeholder theory for organizations. This concept has been later transposed into the field of project management, and this is what we are concerned with here. Stakeholders are essentially defined as individuals or organizations that have some kind of relationship with the project. The form of this relationship has obviously to be clarified. Stakeholders can be impacted by project activities, for instance, local communities in the vicinity of the storage site. Stakeholders can also be concerned by the nature of the project impacts without being directly impacted. For instance, a global NGO having a position of principle on CCS. Or stakeholders can be just in capacity to influence a project. For instance, an administrative body in charge of verifying compliance to regulations or a financing institution. What makes the concept of stakeholder difficult to use and therefore its positioning with respect to the project complex to analyze is the different forms of relationship between stakeholders and a project. So at the screening stage, it's useful to broadly classify these stakeholders. Categories can be used such as public authorities, economic actors, civic society organizations, local communities, research institutes and universities, and company internal. The positioning of each stakeholder with respect to the project should then be characterized in a qualitative and a quantitative manner. What does this mean? So first, the evaluation of the nature of the relationship between the stakeholder and the project, the flavor, the color of this relationship. For that purpose, we use a mapping technique that has been originally developed by Murray and Webster, who advocates for the need of accounting for three important dimensions in this evaluation. First, the power or the influence. Second, the interest. And third, the attitude towards the project. The two first dimensions are rated in a very simple way. Either they are high or low. More possibilities are provided for the attitude dimension, ranging from positive attitudes towards the project, here named collaborative, to negative ones, named hostile. A simple estimation of the intensity of the relationship that the stakeholder has with the project can also be evaluated from the mapping results. On the graphics, light colors are used for low intensity and darker ones as the intensity increases. As a matter of fact, a powerful stakeholder interested by the project, having either a hostile or a collaborative attitude, will have a very strong or intense relationship with the project. This little stakeholder profiling tool is quite powerful and can be used further to predict possible stakeholder behaviors. The table on the right provides a few examples of these stakeholder profiles, which are directly derived from the three-dimensional mapping. For instance, a high power, high interest, and hostile stakeholder will be an opponent, while a high power, low interest, and collaborative one will be called a sleeping giant. Up to 16 stakeholders profile have been defined, which can be used as proxies for stakeholders' behaviors towards the project. This very simple model has some foundations in social psychology theories, where a significant amount of research work has been done to relate attitudes to behaviors. We recall here a very well-known model called the model of rational behavior, of which we give a very simplified version. In this model, people's behavioral intentions are determined by attitude and their perception of self-efficacy. The former can be related to our concepts of attitude and interest, the latter to power and influence.
So once you've identified and analysed your stakeholders, and I think it's probably worth just reminding that that's something that should be done just on a regular basis throughout the project, not just at the beginning of the project, that you can then identify the main issues for the stakeholders and also the issues for the project development team. So could you explain a little about this and maybe touch on some of the methods that you used or that you would recommend using to get this information? So things like the small focus group discussions that you were talking about in the report to verify the issues that you've identified.
Sure. Important issues for stakeholders and project developers must be carefully assessed. I mean, this is the purpose of the next step, which is called the materiality analysis of project issues. All issues that have been raised in CCS projects should be considered, and the list completed with project-specific concerns. This additional information must be collected during face-to-face or focus group discussions involving stakeholders. These issues can be broadly classified in three main categories: environmental issues, issues related to society and communities, and issues related to the industrial sector, company, or to the project. Next is the so-called materiality analysis, which, in simple words, consists in evaluating if an issue is important. Here we use the word significant for stakeholders, for the project developer, or for both. This analysis helps identifying what counts and for whom, a necessary step before the stakeholder engagement phase, during which the conditions for project implementation will be negotiated. But before moving into this next phase, let's go back a bit and illustrate all these methodological steps by providing some results from the social site characterization of the ULCOS project. The ULCOS project aimed at demonstrating the full CCS chain for the steel industry. It involved CO2 capture on a blast furnace in Lorraine, in Moselle department, transportation of the CO2 using a 80-kilometer pipe crossing Meurthe et Moselle department, and storing CO2 in the deep saline aquifer in Meuse, close to the First World War heritage Verdun battlefields. The analysis of the context benefited from a previous study performed by a consultancy company, CNS Conseil, and showed that, among other things, in a context of regional deindustrialization and unemployment, all politicians supported the project, be they local, regional, or national. Nature was an important asset, especially in Meuse, the storage location, where agriculture is the main activity. And the regulatory framework was in place since the EU directive was transposed into the national legislation, although there were some difficulties in the articulation of the mining code and the environmental code. The mapping of stakeholders led to very informative results concerning a few key of them. An environmental alliance was identified, hostile to the project, with high interest but limited power. It was profiled as an ambusher. The county council, with significant power, high interest, and a collaborative attitude, was identified as a project sponsor. An energy and utility company operating geothermal installations with potentially conflict of use for the use of the subsurface was mapped as a punisher, having a challenging attitude and high interest and power. The spider map below shows the concerns profile for the global environmental NGO. As expected, this stakeholder is focused on the environmental issues and less on socioeconomics or techno-economics aspects of the project. Finally, on the right, the materiality analysis of 4 different project issues is displayed. Social equilibrium is an important issue for external stakeholders, less for the project developer. The project owner company image is an important issue for the project developer, but less for external stakeholders. On the contrary, health and safety are definitely very important issues for both. So this materiality analysis allows prioritizing project issues that will be addressed further during the stakeholder engagement sessions.
Thanks, Laurent. I think your methods of mapping and analysing stakeholders are really pretty inventive, and people can see more of these worked out examples from the ULCOS project in the report if you would like more information. Now, I think at this point we will hand over to Philippe, and I was hoping, Philippe, that you might be able to talk us through just briefly how you applied all of this social site characterization work to an actual stakeholder engagement strategy.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Laurent, for your introduction. So, do you see the slide, everybody?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So,
thank you, Philippe.
Okay. So, so what we have done about stakeholder engagement was to our objective is to establish a social context for successful project implementation This favorable social context is created by effective participation from stakeholders. To reach this level of stakeholder engagement, we propose a step-by-step process for revealing and validating the expectations of stakeholders and by taking into account their positions and their demands. By taking into account, we mean that demands of stakeholders will be used to design concrete propositions for the project. To demonstrate the efficiency of this methodology, first, the ULCOS project has been split into 3 components: the CO2 capture zone, the transport, and the storage of CO2 at the Verdun site. Secondly, the process has been simulated with accelerometer data of a stakeholder survey. So now I am going to present to you the simulation of the process we have run for the ULCOS project. So the first step was to split the ULCOS project into 3 components I have said. For each component, we organized focus groups with stakeholders who are directly concerned. For example, landowners who will be more concerned by the transport question than by the CO2 capture process. By stakeholders, we are most often referring to citizens, local governments, representatives of the project, NGOs, and local representatives of public authorities. For each focus group, we address the same 3 main issues, which are the techno-economical dimensions of the project, the environmental dimension, and the socio-economic context. For each focus group, we can run the 3 steps of the process: configuration, evaluation, and comparison. We ask the stakeholders of each focus group to design options for the project component they are concerned by. Again, capture, transport, or storage. I will give you examples of these options in the next slide. We also ask focus groups to define the criteria which will be used for the assessment of the design options. The second and the third steps are run by the independent facilitator and not the project people themselves. The second step is the evaluation of the options proposed by the stakeholders with the criteria that they have chosen. The third step is a display of the evaluated options within the triangle defined by the 3 main issues. Again, environmental, technical, economic dimensions of the project and socio-economic consequences of the project. So how we can read this triangle? Within the triangle, each option is represented by a circle and characterized by its position and by the size of the circle. If the circle is near the center of the triangle, it means that this option is close to the equilibrium, which is the propensity to balance the 3 strategic issues, the green circle, for example. The size of the circle gives information about the performance of the option. That means the performance informs on the ability of the option to comply with the strategic issues. I can give you some examples, some results of what we have done about the results of the simulation which has been run for the storage components of the ULCOS Blast Furnace project in the east of France, with a few people which were playing the role of the key stakeholders. The project developer, the Environmental Alliance, it's a local NGO, a representative of the administration, and a local government. During the simulations, this focus group proposed 12 options which have been split into 4 categories. The storage conditions with 5 propositions, the local development with 1 proposition, the project governance and liabilities with 3 propositions, and the operating condition of the storage with 3 propositions. With these proposed options, we can see that this methodology is able to take into account very different kinds of propositions and can therefore be a useful way of engaging stakeholders and more precisely citizens, since it is possible to take into account propositions which are not directly linked to the complex technical parts of the project. For example, the two options, creation of a research and education platform and stakeholder participation in the design of CO2 losses monitoring systems, are options that give the opportunity for citizens to be effectively and voluntarily involved in the project, providing opportunities to learn from project experts and engineers. It is also possible to integrate stakeholder suggestions that have technical consequences for the project. For example, the proposition safety barriers to ensure containment of fluids. Okay, so just to show you the ranked options within the triangle obtained within the simulation. So you can see that the three main proposition was first technical monitoring of CO2 losses survey, research and education platform, and stakeholder participation in the design of the CO2 losses monitoring systems. And we can make some relationship between these options and the previously identified material issues that have been presented by Laurent. And we can see that the important issues are within the game: health and safety, social equilibrium, and image of the company. So the main lessons we have learned from this simulation, from this process, is that it's possible to engage stakeholders to participate in building a project. What we have learned is that this engagement will only be successful if stakeholders trust the process and feel that their proposal will be considered in the same way as the technical propositions given by the project developer. Finally, stakeholder acceptance relies on each party's ability to clearly articulate preferences through science-based assessment and comparison, and based on jointly established rules. To build stakeholder confidence in the process, it is important to adapt the process to the social, cultural, economical, political, environmental, and technical context, so the local context, as it has been described by Laurent. And it is important to respect each proposed option to ensure everybody, and more precisely the citizens, that each options will be evaluated in the same way, and to open up the evaluation process to all the stakeholders. Transparency of the process is a crucial point to get the confidence and the engagement of the stakeholders. That's it for me.
Okay, so we'll just hand over to Laurent now to conclude and summarize the lessons that you have learned from the report. Thanks, Laurent.
Thank you, Christy. So the general conclusions that I would like to draw from these studies and the lessons learned are the following. Social acceptability, we have shown it is the results of a process that will foster, that will help stakeholders assess and decide on the conditions in which a project is to be implemented. And definitely these conditions are not given, but they should be discussed, defined, and agreed upon during the stakeholder engagement process. To some extent, we show that stakeholders should definitely be co-constructing these conditions. On the conditions that will help, achieving a successful outcome from this negotiation are the understanding of the project context first, and this is why we definitely advocate for a very deep social side characterization, the acknowledgement of stakeholders' concerns, as well as the project developer constraints, because a project will not happen if at least conditions, technico-economic conditions, reasonable conditions are not acceptable by the project developer. In addition, the attitude and willingness of the project developer has to be assessed, and also they have to accept to engage into a dialogue. And finally, the engagement strategy has to be carefully planned. Another point which is quite important is that the deployment of a process that will be successful requires to work in a multidisciplinary team and to make a liaison between the project developer and the project stakeholders. For sure, scientists, technical people and economists have to be involved, by also sociologists, psychologists and definitely communication experts. Finally, the conditions for social acceptability, including stakeholder engagement, should be maintained throughout the project life. We should start early, but continue talking and engaging stakeholders all along the operations till project site closure, for instance.
Laurent and Philippe, thank you so much. I think that's been a fantastic presentation. We have had a couple of questions peeking through, but I actually wanted to start with one for Laurent in terms of stakeholder attitudes. So the model that you use to predict behaviour, I just wondered how well it's matched with the real situation. So when you have used this methodology before and you have done these predictions for stakeholder behaviours, does it have a good success rate in terms of predicting behaviors?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we have been using this very simple model in a few different contexts, whether they are project management context or stakeholders, I mean, corporation stakeholders, corporate stakeholders profiling, and definitely these three dimensions works quite well in identifying the potential behavior that stakeholders may have towards a project. But I have to say that it's a little bit more complex, of course, than what I presented before, I mean, during this talk, and you will get more information in the report. There are other factors influencing behaviors such as social norms in this model, and it's documented again in the report. However, maybe you should keep in mind that the model has been developed in the context of cognitive psychology and refers to the rational behavior. That's even its name. And of course, we know that all actors are not necessarily rational.
Irrational actors, never. Laurent, we've had and Philippe actually, we've had a question come through from Australia to say, at what stage of a project development should this work really be initiated on the work that you've been presenting today? And really, once a project is having difficulties with stakeholders and they're encountering a lot of opposition, is it too late for this kind of work, or is there still a use for these methodologies at the point at which a project is experiencing stakeholder crisis?
Yes, I may start, and I will hand it over to Philippe later. I believe that it's never too late to engage stakeholders, and we have numerous examples that on stakeholder engagement sessions that helped fixing very conflicting situations. But I would still recommend, of course, to engage stakeholders as early as possible, but not necessarily in the same way, you know, in early phases and during, for instance, I mean, design phase or feasibility phase. In very early phases, I think that we should concentrate on stakeholders who are positive about the project, engaging them in face-to-face meeting, more with the objective of characterizing the stakeholder base and getting information on other stakeholders, which may be a little bit more in the opposition. And then later, of course, we will have to organize to go through these focus group discussions when really during design phase we have to work on the project options and decide for the conditions that should be chosen for a successful project implementation.
Thank you, Laurent. Is it possible to pass to Philippe and we can see if he has a response as well?
Yes, I agree with Laurent that it's never too late to engage the stakeholders. The condition is that it's necessary to have something to discuss and to negotiate, what I call a degree of freedom, and we can always discuss until the choice will be to choose the color of the painting. It will not work. But if there is something which is very concrete to discuss, to negotiate with stakeholders, it's possible to engage them in the process.
Thank you, Philippe. Okay, we have another question which has come through from Martin Oshinger, who is also in Australia. And I don't know, this may be tricky for you to answer. I think possibly Laurent. Martin is asking to assist project directors in understanding resources and time required to undertake social site characterization. Can you give some guidance on how early and how much funding is required?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a tricky one, and it depends a lot on the size of the project. What I know more and more now is more and more teams are assembled and fully dedicated to this kind of activities. So, in my opinion, now it's becoming an effort of a couple, 3, 4 persons very, very often, with different specializations and different focus, again depending on the activities, because definitely during the stakeholder engagement phase you have to work with people able to moderate, to communicate with these stakeholders, moderate meetings, and these are very, very special skills. How to handle, for instance, an opponent in a stakeholder engagement discussion is a very, very complex, complex thing, and you have to have people able to do that. So in the early phases, again, I don't know, 1, 2 persons working for close to 6 months to a year is probably enough to conduct a context characterization. But how things move forward, when things move forward, and during the stakeholder engagement phase, the team has to be reinforced for sure.
I think possibly also, though, it is worth pointing out the point you made in the lessons learned and conclusions, that it's not just about a public engagement team. It is about having this work integrated throughout the project team, so that you have those experts who are able to communicate with people at different levels and work. You know, it is part of everybody's job really within a project.
Yeah, I fully agree. And what is lacking very often is a coordinator, for this kind of work, which has a wide understanding of all the issues that have to be fixed, and all the disciplines that have to be brought together in order to move forward towards a successful engagement phase.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from Peter Stigson, and this time he's asking that you spoke about the importance of understanding context to be able to predict stakeholder engagement and concerns. And he's asked, in your experience, what contexts have been the most important ones? So what he's asking to know more about is which ones are likely to raise opposition. In your experience, what have you seen as the things which are the red rag to public engagement, aside from job opportunities?
They are. I will take it in different way, and there are conditions which are favorable. And in the case of the ULCOS project, for instance, we found that in terms of social acceptability, the conditions were not that bad at all, because for instance, people were expecting that the project would bring significant activity in conditions where unemployment was a very big issue. So the biggest problem that people were raising, the biggest issue that people were raising were definitely concerns about the environment, especially because Meuse is a green territory. However, again, let's keep in mind that Meuse, the economic activity in Meuse is extremely low. So people were, definitely expecting, and that would have counterbalanced their kind of opposition because of environmental concerns. People were expecting that the project would bring economic activities. So here the problem is really to reach some kind of balance between benefits and drawbacks. And I think that providing this balance is achieved, people are really, especially local communities, are ready to accept a project in their grounds. But again, they should not bear all the disadvantages of a project. And this is what we call fair distributions of benefits and disadvantages.
And I think I might try and bring Philippe in here as well, because I think the co-construction element that you have been discussing is very important here, that when you have a project which perhaps the benefits are not so obvious, so the job benefits or some of the traditional benefits of infrastructure projects are not so obvious with CCS, that it is so important to have this element of co-construction so that a community or key stakeholders can help to shape, what will be of benefit to them for this project, because a project developer does not necessarily know what will benefit this community. There is sometimes more to it than the obvious, creating jobs.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and definitely, stakeholders are generally the first source of information in terms of benefits that they could get from the project. However, in some cases, they don't necessarily think about possibilities. Again, taking the example of the Meuse environment and the storage site in the case of ULCOS project, Philippe pointed out the possibility to create a research and education platform that was proposed, by us, just in order to develop activities on the storage site, because we all know that the storage activities don't bring too much, in terms of local economic development. So you have to think of different possibilities, and definitely developing a research infrastructure and bringing researchers on site, creating to some extent a dedicated laboratory, and this associated to educational activities would have helped to create activities on site.
And excitement, I guess, for the community about the project that they're involved with.
Yeah, for sure.
We have a number of questions, but I think I would like to ask this one just as a clarification. So this is a question from Gerard Levers, and he was asking what was the final outcome of the ULCOS study, and was it found that there was public acceptance for CCS in the region? So first of all, I will say, Gerard, you'll need to download the report. But second, it's probably worth just a clarification that because the ULCOS project in France was stalled, the actual process that Laurent, Philippe had gone through had to be a simulation. So the outcomes that you will see in the report, they are the best examples that we have been able to give from doing the simulation of the engagement plan.
That's correct, Christy. In fact, the project was put on hold just, I mean, in the middle of the study that we were doing, and but still it was decided at start, you know, that we would go through this simulation session for one very interesting reason. It was because ArcelorMittal wanted to be convinced that this stakeholder engagement phase was I mean, could be properly handled with enough control so that there is no complete divergence, you know, and they wanted to build trust on the process. So I think the simulation session is very useful for that, you know, being done in a very limited scope with the project developer, within the project developer organization, and a few external and close project stakeholders. It definitely helps to engage the project developer organization itself. So, but unfortunately, our study stopped at this stage, and we are looking forward to implementing and deploying the methodology for CCS projects, which are definitely still on the roadmap.
Great. I think that's a very important point about the stakeholder trust, the stakeholder trust, but the project developer trust. To have a project developer who is willing to engage in this kind of co-construction is difficult to find somebody who has that level of trust in facilitators. So I think what you've shown with this report is that the methodology is there, it is sound, it has been demonstrated in other industries as well as in CCS now, and that hopefully it can increase confidence of project developers in a way to do this activity. Okay, I have one last question that I will address just now, and then if we can squeeze in two, we will do our best. Then we will close up for this morning. So the last question is from Baron van Elgenberg, and he is asking, in the approach given, and he said that it seems very well developed and a good starting point for controversial projects. You start with the project initiator as the main actor. Now he's saying, would your approach be different when the technology is still in its infancy and it is needing a lot of R&D and public support to start and continue? He's saying that in such cases, it's more likely that it would be governments and administrations who are co-owners of the projects. So would this have a different approach?
Not necessarily a different approach, but I mean, definitely you can adjust the players for this kind of studies depending on the maturity of the technology. For technologies which are in very, very early phases of development, we found quite useful to interrogate the scientific community and also NGOs in these very early stages, because they are important actors which have, of course, technical background and the ability to understand in depth what are the possible consequences of technologies, and then you can move a little bit to more, I would say, to stakeholders who are less familiar with technical matters, to try to assess what can be again the irrational fears at time that could be brought by very new technologies, because these are perceptions in that case and no longer rational arguments.
Thanks, Laurent. And I'd just like to bring Philippe in for the last question. And this one has come from Stephanie van Rossen. So Stephanie has asked if we could describe an occasion when this style of engagement, so the co-construction, Philippe, has changed a stakeholder's opinion. So it's moved stakeholders from a place where they are perhaps non-committed to a project, or perhaps even against a project, to being more involved. Are you able to describe an occasion when this has been used successfully?
If I were understood, you were talking about the fact that if the process has changed the position of stakeholders?
Correct. Thanks, Philippe.
Yes. And well, as you have said, it was a simulation. So we have in the game we have stakeholders from the project themselves, and what it was very interesting is that at the end of the process, the leader of the project from ArcelorMittal was very surprised by the fact that this method was very powerful to be able to engage stakeholders. When I mean stakeholders, the other stakeholders such as citizens in something which is very technical, and we were able to, as he said, to transform some social demands into something which we could measure, even if it was a qualitative evaluation. So during this process, we have seen that the project developer, the project leader, has changed his position about the fact that it was safe to involve citizens or NGO into a co-construction process. So, well, for me, it was the very important lesson from this simulation process, that to see that the project leader was at the end of the process, he was ready to run the process. He was not scared anymore about the fact to be in the field. So, as Laurent said, we were not able to run the process in the field because they stopped the project, but the leader of the project was ready to do it with the stakeholders, with the citizens, with all the people in the field.
If I may add, Philippe, I think that you have also used this process in a water management project.
Okay.
Successfully.
Yes.
In real conditions. Huh?
Yes, thank you, thank you. In real condition, we have run this process within the question of how to comply between agriculture and preservation of water resources. So we run this process really in the field with farmers and with NGOs and all the people living in the area close to Toulouse, very agricultural area. And at the end of the project, we have seen that people and stakeholders have changed their position. When I say they have changed their position, it doesn't mean that they have changed their ideas, their deep concept of their deep convictions. But what they have changed is they were ready to discuss with the other. They were ready to find solutions that they could run together with the other stakeholders. So it's a very effective process to make people to work together, to decide together some things that they were not ready to do before the process.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Now, I have one last question. I'm sorry, there have been a lot of questions coming in, so we will do our best to answer these after the webinar. But just this last one, which I think is an important a point in clarification. So the question was just saying, really, how important is it to use an external facilitator in terms of getting stakeholders to interact with project developers on this kind of work? Should it always be an independent facilitator who will do this work? And are there people who specialize in this area for projects to contact?
So first, I would say that moderating focus group discussions requires very specific skills, and definitely professionals must be engaged for that. To some extent, for sure, they should be independent. that's best, because what is required from them, is just to create the best conditions for group discussions. Apart from that, of course, you can engage external people who are experts, for instance, that will complement the groups by bringing some additional views. All this has to be defined during a very important step, which we did not discuss too much today, but which is the definition of the stakeholder engagement strategy itself. Something we did not touch is also the composition of the focus groups, but I mean, a lot of care has to be taken, in designing properly these groups, based again on the range of issues that the project is raising, and also the mapping of the different stakeholders. So there is a lot to be added to this presentation, and also there is a lot for additional applied research to clarify and tune the methodology.
Thank you, Laurent. So I think it's probably time to wrap up now. We've been on for quite a while. I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. But most of all, to thank Laurent and Philippe for your excellent presentations and for answering all of these questions. There has been quite a good deal of interest and questions coming through, so we will do our best to address these individually with the people who have asked the questions. And if there are a number of groups of areas of interest, I think focus groups could possibly be one of them. We'll maybe see if we can do some follow-up work in the future. It is obviously an area of interest for a number of stakeholder engagement managers globally. So all that's left to say then is thank you very much, and please everybody download the report. We'll just move the slide presentation on so you can see the links directly there to where you can find the report on the Institute website. And also, if you have any feedback that you would like to give about the seminar this morning, then there is an address that you can send your feedback to there. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.